no one's
yeah.
you're good with numbers, right? Not at this point.
Good evening, it's Monday, February 24th, and I'd like to call to order the meeting of the Personnel, Finance, and Auxiliary Services Committee. We are, let's just see here, there's a possibility that a quorum of the full membership of the board may be in attendance at committee meetings. There will be no full board action taken at a board committee meeting. Only members of the committee may vote on any item on the agenda. A live broadcast will be streamed on the school district's YouTube page. To watch the recorded meeting, please visit our School District of Menominee Falls YouTube site. It is 5:07:06. We are in the Village Hall Upper Level Conference Room, number 3344/45 at West 156, North 8480, Pilgrim Road in Menominee Falls. Was the meeting properly posted?
It was, yes.
Okay. The next item, first item on the agenda is minutes approval, the approval from the January 27th meeting. Can I get a motion to approve?
Motion.
I will second that. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, first item for discussion is the final 23/24 audit report. I don't know if I'm
I can
sending
kick
this
it
to Caitlin.
Yep.
Okay, super.
All right, so each year we are required to complete a financial audit at the close of our fiscal year. So we work with Baker Tilly, and Miss Wendy Unger, CPA partner with Baker Tilly, is here tonight to present our 23-24 audit. So Ms. Unger, the floor is yours.
All right, well, thank you very much. Great to be here tonight. You should have in front of you two bound documents. One is the audited financial statement. The other one with the plastic cover is our reporting and insights document. And then you do have a slide presentation that's up on the screen, but also in a paper format in front of you. I will use the slide presentation to go through both of those documents at a relatively high level. Please feel free to ask any questions as I go through. Happy to try to address those as we move through the presentation. So the agenda for our discussion tonight, I'm gonna go through some high-level audit results, also some very high-level summary financial information. I have included a couple additional bullet points towards the end of the presentation, just some information that I think is important for you to be aware of. And then I will also open it up to questions at the end if you have any additional. So beginning on the next page, the audit results. The objective of our audit was to issue an opinion on the financial statements of the district. We've done that. And similar to the opinion that you've received in the past, we've issued a clean, unmodified opinion. That is the highest level of assurance you can obtain from us as your auditors. That information or that clean unmodified opinion means that we have followed generally accepted accounting principles. All disclosures that are required to be included have been. All the financial statement information that is within your audited financial statements is believed to be materially accurate. We also note that there were no changes in accounting principles, so there was a year where you had no new governmental accounting standards that were effective. However, you're not gonna be as lucky for FY25, and we'll touch on that in a moment. So moving to the next page, this is where I've highlighted the summary information for the reporting and insights document. I have included page references on the slides so that you can look at that information at your convenience, but just a couple items to note regarding this document. So we utilize this document to communicate comments and recommendations that may come up as part of the audit process under our standards. If there's any type of material weakness or significant deficiency in internal controls, we are required to communicate that in writing. We also use this document to share some of the standard communication that we need to have with you under auditing standards. Just a couple items to mention included in that document. We continue to have a material weakness noted because we, as your auditors, do prepare your audited financial statements. We become part of your internal control structure for a very brief portion of time, but that is a material weakness in internal control. So that is communicated in writing. That is not new or different, and that is not unusual for organizations such as the district. In fact, 95% of our clients have that material weakness. Very happy to say though that there were no audit adjustments proposed, so all the records that were provided to us to be audited required no adjustments to be materially accurate, so that is very positive, because that is not something we see very often, where there are no journal entries, so your team should be commended for that. We also include within that document some other comments and recommendations. The one item that we've included in there is just making sure that new vendors are reviewed and approved prior to paying any bills. I'm really looking for legitimacy. If there's fraud that can occur, it is at that vendor level. So just making sure that you have a robust process in place and review and approving them before any of those bills are paid. Under the required communication section, and again, that's where we communicate information that we need to share under our standards. Again, nothing unusual or unexpected in that section. The only thing I will remind you of, and we'll talk about these in a moment, there are numerous estimates that are included within the district's financial statements, and those range from depreciation on your capital assets based on estimated useful lives. You do have a pension liability, that's your participation in WRS, that is based on estimation and actuarial assumptions. We also include in your financial statements your self-insurance activity, your IBNRs, booking that type of claim figure. So again, numerous estimates, and some of those are very large figures. So we just always want to remind management and the committee and the board of that. Also included in that report, some two-way communication. It's the very back portion of the document, and that just really solicits input for upcoming audits. If there's any areas of current concern or things you'd like us to take a look at, please feel free to reach out. And then the last thing that I will just note included in that document, I mentioned this when I began, there is a section in there, there is a link for committee and board resources. This takes you out to our website where there's all types of updates, standard updates, that type of activity. But I do wanna highlight there is a section in that document where we list out the new governmental accounting standards, or GASBs, that will be effective for the district, and the one that will need to be focused on for FY25 is GASB 101, and that is the accounting and treatment of compensated absences. So looking at how the district records various PTO, vacation pay, sick pay, whatever it may be, making sure the new standard requires a little bit more robust methodology to that, and also recording some additional benefits, so FICA, WRS percentages on those items, but we'll work with management to ensure the district is able to comply with that requirement if they're not doing so already. We haven't seen a lot of change in how most organizations are accounting, but we do need to evaluate. Shifting gears just very quickly before we get into the financial information. In addition to the financial statement audit, we also do what's referred to as a uniform guidance or a single audit. That is a review of the compliance with both federal and state regulations. Those programs are determined on a cycle type testing basis. That report is in the back of your audited statements. So to put this in perspective, we expend roughly 4.2 million of federal money. Your largest portion during FY24 was ESSER. So you'll see a significant decrease in that. That was roughly 1.8 million. During 24, we tested ESSER for compliance, we tested Medicaid for compliance, and we also tested Child Nutrition Cluster for compliance. So those three programs were tested. Very happy to say there were no compliance findings noted on any of those. In addition, because you do have a federal compliance audit, you are also required to have a state compliance audit. Wisconsin is one of the states that require that. You expend roughly 21.8 million of state revenue. As you would imagine, your largest portion is your equalization aid, that's roughly 16 million. And again, that is the program that was tested on the state side, and again, no compliance finding noted. So very positive on result from a compliance standpoint. Shifting gears then, on the next slide, this is where I've presented some very high level financial information, and this is the results of your general fund for FY24. Looking at actual to budget comparison for the activity. When we look at the revenues, you'll note 55.7 million of actual compared to a $54.5 million budget. So you were over budgeted revenue by roughly 1.2 million. That is a favorable variance, and the main contributing factor to that is your investment income. $1 million over budget, so very favorable market conditions during the year that allowed for that. You also had some additional student fees that were collected over and above the budgeted figures. When you look at expenditures, also a favorable variance, 54.3 million of actual compared to a $55.9 million budget. You were $1.6 million under budget in your expense categories. Really three contributing factors to that. Your instructional support services were $450,000 under budget. Within your buildings and grounds area, you were $421,000 under budget. Mainly in your constructive service category, so less projects done than anticipated or expected. And then the final amount, $594,000, is really in the other support services category, and that relates to more or less your contingency monies that you budget for as part of your budget process. So overall, you added $1.4 million to fund balance when you budgeted to use 1.4 million. So you had a positive swing of $2.8 million and ended the year at $22 million of fund balance. That fund balance is broken into the four categories that I've detailed out at the bottom. A portion of that, $252,000, is non-spendable. Those are prepaids and inventory. So they're expenses that you paid for, they just haven't ran through your revenue and expense side yet because they're still sitting on your balance sheet, but the cash is gone. So we pull those out. You have a small portion that's restricted. This is carryover grant money of $144,000. You have 7.2, almost 7.3 million of assigned. So these are monies that management has earmarked as set-asides. Assigned numbers can always be unassigned just by a management decision, does not require any type of board action. That 7.3 million is roughly 3.4 million has been set aside for capital. There's 1.4 million of school carryovers, and then 2.5 million that has been set over as part of your self-funded health program. The remaining portion, 14.4 million, is unassigned. This is your your contingency, your working capital, your rainy day money. That represents roughly 25.7% of your operating budget. We look for that to be somewhere between 10 and 25. So you're at the higher end of that, but that is a positive. That allows you some flexibility, allows you some cash on hand if something unforeseen would come out, and also looks very favorable when and if you need to go to the bond market from a rating agency standpoint. So very positive results in your general fund. On the next page, I've highlighted the remaining funds of the district. The first column there is your special education fund. This is a break-even fund. You collect federal and state monies. You spend roughly 8.9 million. The offset between what you collect from Fed and state and what you spend is a transfer in from your general fund. So the general fund covered roughly $5 million of the expenses during the year. That fund ended at zero fund balance as required by DPI. The next column is your capital project fund that had no activity during the year. The next column is your debt service fund, 8.5 million of revenue. Most of that is in the form of taxes that you've levied and collected. 15.9 million of principal and interest. Appears to be a very large number, but also remember that during the year you defeased your 2016 debt issue. That was roughly $10 million, if I recall correctly. So
Wasn't it 12 million?
Roughly 12.
12, did I say 10? I'm sorry, said 10. Yes, roughly 12 million. So you had 1.3 million of fund balance left in that fund, used up some money that you had accumulated. That 1.3 million of fund balance is all restricted. It can only be used for debt service purposes until the debt of the district is paid in full. That final column, which is titled non-major, and this can be found towards the back of your statements in more detail, but this is really the remaining funds of the district, your gift trust fund or your Fund 21, food service, and then your community service funds. When you look at them collectively, 5.5 million of revenue, a good portion of that, almost 3 million of that is coming through your Fund 80, so your community service programs. 1.7 million is what you collect via food service, not only revenue from your students and teachers, but also through your federal and state programs. You spent collectively in those funds 6.2 million. Again, as you would expect, Fund 80 is the larger portion of that by approximately 2.7 million. And then Fund 50 ended the year with 2.4 million in expenses. So when we go down to that fund balance section and we look at the ending balances, your food service, I'll skip down a couple, was 407,000 as of the end of the year. That saw a large decrease of roughly $659,000 during FY24. Your community service fund, 1.3 million, that's up 172,000 over the previous year. And then your Fund 21, your gift trust fund, saw a decrease of 110,000. So overall, that's activity equates to the 597,000 of decrease in fund balance, ending the year at 2.3 million. On the next page and last page of information that I will share with you, these are some of the bullet points that I mentioned that I think is important for you to be aware of and just kind of keep in mind. The first item here refers to your ability to borrow, which is 10% of your equalized value. That equates to over $605 million. You had outstanding as of the end of 24 or FY24, roughly 18 million. So it's the difference between the two of those, or 588 million of borrowing capacity. So very large ability to borrow there, very positive scenario for the district. The next item talks about other post-employment obligations, and the district does not have any OPEB obligations. You do have money that you have accumulated in a trust, and I know you're working to determine how to utilize that, and that cash held in trust as of the end of the year was $2.8 million. The next bullet point here is your defined benefit pension plan obligation. This is your stipend plan. This was a liability of $7.56 million as of the end of the year, and that was very consistent with the previous year. So any additions to that also were offset by payouts in that program. Again, extensive footnote on this based on actuarial information that's provided. The last item on this page is your participation in WRS. This is also a liability that is recorded on the district's book on the very top side statements. This liability as of the end of the year was $2.5 million. That's down $6.5 million over the previous year. Reminder, when it's a liability, it's not something you owe. When it's an asset, it's not something you get. It is all based on your proportionate share of the funded level of that program. When it's a liability, that means the program is slightly underfunded. When it's an asset, it means it's overfunded. All of that is driven by market. So we just talked about, how, FY24 was a positive year from an investment income standpoint. Obviously, their market results were similar, so that liability is moving in the positive direction. The only other item I would caveat on that bullet point is that calculation is done as of 12/31 of 23. So it's not based on your fiscal year, so you're always roughly 6 months off, just based on when WRS has their audit and their actuarial evaluation done. So just keep in mind that when we talk market, you gotta think about the year in which that activity was coming from. On the next slide, I've included all of my contact information. Happy to talk with anybody or any of you regarding the results or what we do or don't do, or if you have more detailed questions about the reports, happy to go through those with any of you or the board. But I'd also be happy to try to answer any questions you might have now.
I have a question about page 25. So page
Of
20,
which booklet?
financial statements and supplementary information. So that talks about the 17.945 million in our debts at the bottom there.
Yep.
And so the date issues, and I'm familiar with what this is, but big picture, our original indebtedness was 30 million, almost 31 million. We've paid about half of it down, so 14.5 million left. And then other refunding bonds at 8.3 for total of 17.94 million. Now, when you were mentioning there's over 500 million in availability of loan levy authority or loan authority, just more for the cameras and obviously for the board and everybody else, what did you mean by that? I mean, I know what you mean, but more about, that doesn't mean we're going to go and
No.
find loans.
No, so if you look at the paragraph in the middle of page 25, that's the paragraph where I
Yep.
highlighted, again, your capacity to borrow is the 605 million.
Right,
You have roughly 18 million outstanding, so you have 588 million that you could go out and borrow if you wanted to, needed to. So really showing that you have a very large capacity available to you. I have many clients where that capacity is either minimal, non-existent, because they borrowed up to their thresholds. So it really is just proving the financial stability of the district by the amount you could borrow and the amount you have outstanding. Does that answer the question or?
yep, and all of our loans are sitting somewhere between 2 and 5% depending on whatever it is.
Yep, and as you can see in that table on the bottom of that page, you have the refunding bonds will fall off of your payment schedule in FY '27. And then the remaining improvement bonds from 2016 will fall off in FY '33. So, coming up within the next couple of years, you'll have, 3.4 million of debt that's gone. And continue to work down that one issue, and if you do nothing else, you'd be debt free.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the bigger picture there is the dates, the 2027's final maturity and then bonds callable, other defeasance possibilities perhaps. I mean, we don't know yet, but given that we defeased already and that 12 million is sitting out there, so I like page 25 because it kind of wraps our debts, which also looks to our future ability to borrow, but also stay fiscally responsible.
So if I understood what you said, that 600,000 or 600 million, you said that there's other districts out there that will borrow up to that?
But you have to remember that their
Like in the
capacity to
series.
borrow is based on their equalized value. So you're an area or a district with a very large equalized value. Where you go to some of these smaller districts
Got
and 10% of their equalized value is 10 million.
Got
So
Okay.
a very different picture based on your location.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think page 25 is a very good big picture page for anybody, the community to look at, for a board to look at, and to review, but
Do we image these documents and put them anywhere, or they just?
Oh yeah, they'll be on our website
Perfect.
under business services, and then we also have, we got a bunch of copies, so all board members will have these, but we also have a multiple handouts out front. If anybody is, waiting to be seen and feels like reading a financial statement, they'll be out there. So,
Riveting.
yes, I also did want to point out one other, note. So Wendy talked about a new vendor review process, so we are looking forward to this coming audit where that will no longer be on our, a recommendation from Baker Tilly because we have just implemented our new process, like this week or last week. So working through what that new process, actually looks like in the weeds, we've just begun it within Skyward. So there's an actual approval process within Skyward for a new vendor. So, yeah. We talked about, should we email Baker Tilly right now, just say like, watch for this one. So, and we do really appreciate working with Wendy and her team. Baker Tilly has been really great in just, our day-to-day operations and communicating with them, but then also, their scope of the audit, so, and their recommendations.
questions?
All right,
Thank you, Wendy.
have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming in.
Of course.
Nice work.
Thanks.
Took your report card.
Yeah, right.
It's really great news. But I added to my superintendent's report,
Absolutely.
like in brief, but it's just, it's great, very positive news about the financial health of the district.
And I will say, it takes a lot of work to have, I'll say no audit findings, but we know there's one where Baker Tilly does our financial statements, and as Wendy said, that's 95% of the school districts in the state. And that doesn't come with, just doing nothing, like we have to work towards that, and we have an amazing business office team, shout out to Matt for leading our audit and making sure that, she mentioned the audit adjustments that were not necessary this year. So what we do each year is we look at, what did they recommend, what audit adjustments were needed, and work to better that the next year. So, and of course, like being here a few years helps too, so it is, we're proud of that, of course, so.
No post-employment benefit liabilities. She's really good. I mean, Wendy, in terms of presentation, our team is very good. But that's also a very big positive. I mean, a large number of school districts that it has a Fund 73, they struggle with. And,
Right.
We don't struggle there.
Right, she reported that as a balance, the $2.8 million is a balance in our Fund 73. So many districts are kind of in the opposite situation where they have that outstanding liability that's owed.
That's great. It is a very good story hearing what a lot of districts are saying, so.
Okay, the next item is, the 2025-26 preliminary budget assumptions and forecast projections.
They have it.
Okay.
Unless you change.
So this is what's posted on board docs, but just if you feel the need to write on something, I did print this one out.
Thank you.
Okay. So we reviewed recently our budget calendar, so in February, we start looking at our assumptions for our budget, and we're talking at a high level. We do dig way farther into the weeds in the coming meetings through March and summer to create a balanced budget for the coming year. So this is our very first look at our budget assumptions and early forecast projections for the coming year. So this is all regarding our 25-26 budget. As we talked earlier, a couple meetings ago before the close of the calendar year, we talked about our health insurance premiums increasing significantly. So those, as of 1/1/25, have increased by 20%. And I'll remind everybody that we're coming off 6 years of 0% increases. Our 20% increase represents $1 million more of expense in our budget. And this is attributed to our increases in our high-cost prescription drugs on our health insurance plan. So that has dramatically altered our budget forecast, simply our health insurance increase. On top of our 1/1/25 increase of the 20%, and working closely with our health insurance brokers, they've instructed us that just based on market trend, not school district of Menominee Falls, but in the market as a whole, across the United States, we should no longer be comfortable or expect that 0%. Those days are long gone, as they've told us, and this is again a nationwide issue. It's hitting school districts across the state of Wisconsin, but nationwide as well. So going forward, we are using a 10% increase for health insurance. Obviously, these are compounding numbers, so when we have our $1 million more this year, 1/1/25, this calendar year, and we add a 10% on top of that, that's a significant compounding increase. So we're looking at over 2 years, $1,600,000 more in expense just attributed to our health insurance increases.
Mostly
So-
prescription drugs.
Mostly high-cost prescription drugs. And I kind of laid this out, I've toyed with how to go about explaining our budget assumptions and these early projections. But I wanted to start with kind of reviewing high-level expenses and high-level revenues, and then we'll dig into health insurance a little bit in a little bit, in depth. So like, what does that mean? How has it happened? And then what are the areas that how are we looking to address it in terms of strategies? So I'm sorry to start with the bad news, but a dramatic alteration of our budget forecast due to these high cost prescription drugs and high increases on our health insurance plan. So 20% as of 1/1/25, which we are already implementing, and then looking at an additional 10% the following year. In terms of revenue and how that compares, revenue is only projected to increase by $800,000 from 24-25. So when we look at how that compares to our health insurance increases, it doesn't keep pace with our health insurance increases. And then we have other increases on top of that. So we have wages, we have transportation, we have utilities, we have our roofs, for example, cost a couple $100,000 more than they would have pre-COVID times, really. So our expenses are exceeding our revenue growth. In terms of enrollment and open enrollment, as these are important assumptions that we have to make within our budget as well, we're looking at a declining student enrollment, so projected decrease of 10 student FTE, so that's that membership number that we use within the revenue limit in 25-26. So a decrease of 10 from the prior year. And if you'll recall, the revenue limit, the main gist of the formula is our resident membership FTE times our per pupil amount. So when one of those key factors is decreasing, that's ultimately decreasing our revenue. And then another key factor with our enrollment is that for the first time, we're looking at a projected net expense next year in 25-26 of approximately $325,000. This year, we are about a break even in terms of revenue and expense, and those numbers are live, so students can, it's really based on the number of days a student is in school, so it's likely that we'll end up with a small net expense this year in 24-25, but the trend, which we can pull the graph up in a second, is helpful to understand the history of open enrollment. Just 10 years ago in 15-16, we had $1.5 million of net revenue. So for every student who open enrolls in, there's a flat dollar amount. This year it's about $9,000, it's a little under. When a student open enrolls in, we get those dollars, and when they open enroll out, we pay the district those dollars. So the more students we have in, than out is gonna result in a net revenue. So the history is important just because our revenue over time has supported our decreasing open enrollment revenue. We're kind of at the end of that now, where next year, so the dates you're seeing on the open enrollment history that says linked here on your hard doc, obviously you can't open that, but it is linked within board docs. The graph that's linked there is what Matt has pulled up here, and the dates you're seeing along the bottom, that's the fiscal year, that's like the second year of the fiscal year. So the farthest to the right, the 2024 is actually last year, that's 23-24's data. So if we had 24-25 on here, we'd be about a break even, and then the next year we're projecting that decrease in revenue and increase in expense, resulting in a net expense for open enrollment of $325 approximately.
As the board members will remember, the policy changed last year, which allowed for us we already set our open enrollment at 0, I believe in January.
Mhm.
But our new policy that we instituted last year allows us to revisit that in June. So we'll be able to revisit open enrollment after staffing and after we have our students that are existing students, we'll be able to revisit that whole topic in June.
So ultimately, that is to say, this is a new expense of about $300,000 projected for 25-26. And then we have other cost pressures, and these are a lot of, these are high dollar amounts, and they're all in one category of other, but they're also very much impactful in our budget. We have wages, we have transportation, so we know we have our transportation contract that was extended with Johnson Bus. We have CIP projects, so again, those roofs that are costing double what they did just a few years ago. Utilities and special education needs are also areas that are increasing. So at a very high level, our preliminary budget shortfall for 25-26 is approximately $1.3 million. and a few other key assumptions that matter within the next year's budget, the 25-26 budget is CPI is a 2.95%. So that is now set for next year. That is next year's CPI, Consumer Price Index or inflationary rate for 25-26. We talked about our projected decrease of student FTE, so that number is what's used in the revenue limit formula. So current year, we have 3783, and next year is a projected 3773, so a decrease of 10 FTE. We are looking at a very conservative projection of a 1% property valuation increase, so that is the number that affects our mill rate. And as you recall, we were the recipient of basically an error on the assessor's part that resulted in a correction, ultimately decreasing and creating a negative or a decrease in the total equalized value from one year to the next. We will be working with the DOR, they were the ones who helped us kind of pinpoint that decrease from last year to understand how does that affect our valuation going forward. So right now, this is just a conservative assumption. I can assume it will likely be higher, but we'll work with the DOR to get more accurate information on how that will look for us going forward. And then another key piece of information that we'll spend a lot of time tonight on is our special ed reimbursement rate. So we are projected at 33%, which is what is currently in the state budget.
I have a question on that.
Yes, absolutely.
Last year's budget, it didn't pay at the 33%, correct? You were short.
Correct, it was short.
So is it fair to assume the 33% or is it better to project less?
So this year we're at 31.5% that we've budgeted for. To be more conservative, we could do less than 33%. The state has put in current year more money into the bucket, so there's, we don't know until the year ends what percent we actually are going to receive, so.
I just don't know if that was a unique year last year or like when they did the budget, or if it's on trend of, so we have to come up with it as we're solving budget.
Right, well, and we talked to our counterparts and people are maintaining their 33%, so, but I think this is a piece too that as we get closer to year end and once we know our current reimbursement rate, what it will be, like if it's we've budgeted 31.5 to be conservative this year. If it comes, wherever it comes in at is probably where we're gonna wanna project for next year.
Okay.
And we'll also keep our eye on the state budget to see if that's an area where they're going to put more funding into. The governor's proposed a 60% reimbursement rate, which is like double of the 30,
Right.
obviously. So we will talk through the special ed piece and what we've been getting over the years
Okay.
and how special ed is funded next, so.
We would be happy to receive the percentage that they actually approve. And that's part of the problem. That the state, and this isn't just with our district, it's with all the districts. If the state approves 33%, there's not enough money to go around. So then it ends up being less.
Right.
And that's
Right.
part of the issue here. So I've had discussions with at least one of our legislators about this point.
Mhm.
That if it's 35 or it's 38, whatever, or 33 or 34, whatever the special ed reimbursement is, my advocation is that we actually receive that percentage,
Yeah.
not less, because that's,
Yeah, it feels like it's not being fully funded to be
No,
able to meet the needs
right.
of, you're not really paying 33.
No.
It's-
So they call it right now, the funding mechanism is called some certain, and it would need to change
There
to
it is.
some sufficient. So right now, they're saying 33%, but instead we need to say, this is the dollar amount, and we need to fund it at that rate, at that amount, and that equates to this percentage, rather than kind of doing it backwards and saying, here's the percent, but then at the end of the year, we have all the costs, and we divided, and it's short. So we need to fund it sufficiently so that we actually get to this percentage that we're saying. Basically, we as in the state has to flip the way we're doing it and fund it at a dollar amount and not the percent.
Thank you. It's that explanation.
So right now we have a projected deficit of 1.3 million.
Correct.
I mean, a lot changes.
Yep, and this is, this is like the starting point. So we definitely have strategies that we can and will use to chip away at that.
Okay.
We'll get into those details at our next meeting. We're not going to, we will have a balanced budget next year, and there are certainly things that we can do. So I do wanna talk through some of these items. The first one though that I wanna start with is our health insurance and working on some background on that, cause we do have some positive news to report too. But then also some of the strategies that we're working to address those high cost prescription drugs, which will help future budgets as well.
Yeah, I was gonna point that out, you know, that we have deficit of 1.3 million, but our expenses went 1.6 in medical.
Over 2 years.
Over 2 years,
Yeah.
okay.
So if we, we have $1 million more dollars. Literally, we went from 5 million to 6 million in our 241 object, and our actual object for health insurance is kind of odd how close it is to that million mark. We have a literal $1 million more dollars of expenses with that 20% increase in health insurance. And we do have, so let me go through the health insurance information. The good news is that we have had 6 good years with low experience, which has resulted in a savings or reserves for our health insurance that allows us to delay the impact of that 20%. So that $1 million, we can slow play it over a few years and use those reserves. We have $7 million of those reserves to use. So that is a few years, like that's safe to use those, and we should use those dollars to delay the impact. I guess the question is, how long do we delay it? We can soak up and take on a percent of that increase. In a perfect world, we take on all of that percent of that increase so that our budget is accurately reflecting what we have going on. We do have though, like those 6 years have resulted in that reserve, and this is why we have that basically, so that we can make plans to balance our budget.
So Caitlin and I have talked about this at length when she was running me through the entire budget. And we've had multiple years of 0% increases, which has afforded us this surplus in the health insurance reserves. To have these health insurance reserves of between 6 and 7 million. So, but the discussion that we had is a good discussion, and it's a good point for the board to be conscious of, is that if we keep having 1.6 million of increases, you can do that math, that money goes away really quick.
Mhm.
You know, those reserves go to zero quick. So developing a plan, as well as looking at the reserves, is something that we'll be talking to the board about in our next meeting and in future meetings, but it's something to be conscious of. If Kay and her team have done a great job of establishing these reserves, we have these reserves, but, you know,
They're one-time dollars.
they're one-time dollars, once they're gone, they're gone.
Are we
And-
continuing, like, when you said the zero increase is gone, so when you say this is one-time dollars, it's not like we're continuing to like fund a slush fund or a rainy day fund,
Oh, absolutely not.
No,
right? I just wondered.
So the 6 years of 0% increase does not mean healthcare costs didn't increase. It was 6 years of 0% increase to our employee premiums
there,
and deductibles. We were taking on the 4 to 8% a year in actual healthcare costs because of our good years helping to pay for our bad years. So every year, we saw between 4 and 8% increases to our actual healthcare costs. We spent 6 years not passing on any of those costs to employee premiums or deductibles. So that, it's not like there was 0% increasing for 6 years in the healthcare world. It was here we decided to take advantage of our good years and not pass those costs on to employees.
that's,
Yes.
right,
That's what the 6 years are.
yep, that's dialed in, right on the point. We have those health insurance reserves though, and how we spend them in a combination of other activities, which I know they're about to get to here, is part of how, you know, like Caitlin said, we'll have a balanced budget going into the next year. But how we do that, how we set up the long term is important. We wanna look at 3 years to 4 years inside of this strategic plan, but also longer.
So our medical spend is in two buckets or categories. We have medical spend and we have pharmacy spend. So all of our increase right now is attributed to pharmacy spend and in particular high cost drugs. High cost drugs are not, they're everything that you see in commercials. They are not, I should say, except for your, the Ozempics. And I'm gonna put that, there's, multiple different types of those. And those might sound like high cost drugs, but in reality, those are approximately $1,000 a month times 12 months, that's about 12,000 a year. So put it in perspective of our actual high cost drugs are $400,000 annually for one person for 1 year. And that is where our entire increase is attributed to a handful of people that are on our plan who are using these high cost means to have, life impacting medical,
Conditions.
yes.
But those are elective, right?
What do you mean?
The prescription, it's elective. She said Ozempic, that's an elective.
No, she's saying Ozempic is not one of those.
It's not one of our high
So even though you
costs, yeah.
see it as a commercial, at most it would cost you $12,000 a year, depending on your deductible, you're paying $4,000 or $8,000 of that yourself. So the district cost is actually very low. We have people who are on medications that are between $200,000 and $400,000 a year for one person on one med.
So that just takes care of their deductible and then that's the
So
rest of the
their
district.
deductible is, they're so far past that, it doesn't even matter. So we are trying to figure out how to hone in on those 6-figure-a-year drugs. And try to tackle those costs in the way that we can. And so the unfortunate part is usually because you're seeing a commercial for it, it is a newer drug, still within its 20-year patent. So there are no generics, there are no biosimilars, so you're paying that very top dollar price. And then unfortunately, as we've been seeing, they managed to have their one drug come off the 20-year and then they just made a better one. That's even better than the one that just was able to go on generic and now they have a new 20-year patent on it. So
But the
it's-
generic's still an option.
there is still an option, however, your doctor plays a significant role on deciding which medication works best for you. And then the insurance company obviously has some hurdles in place, but some people just can't take a generic because it doesn't work for them or whatever, so.
So here, as I'll read these, you'll recognize the commercials. Here are some names. Stelara, Skyrizi, Humira, Rinvoq. Those are like our top 4, and all those are ringing well for me from commercials. So those that when you're seeing commercials for it, those are generally our high cost. And when we say high cost, we're talking
6 figures.
6 figures, over $100,000 for one person for 1 year on our plan.
So we self-fund our
Everything.
pharmaceuticals. Is there another option where we put that on someone else and we just pay a premium?
We have multiple options that we're looking at. I think those are for future meetings, maybe, right?
Yeah, we'll talk about some specifics just because, well, you don't wanna show your hand, I guess, if we go out anywhere to look into things, but yes. The downside, you don't usually come in and out of that too often, and we have once experienced really good times.
Sure.
So then you take your lumps hoping that, I think our first thing would be pulling the trigger on some things to reduce the district share of those meds. And then see what benefits you gain from that before going back to fully insured. So we're going to meetings all the time with superintendents and the people like Caitlin and I from across the region. And all you hear is self-funded. Everybody is trying to get self-funded.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Right.
everybody is trying to get self-funded. So sometimes we go to a meeting and all they're talking about is how to get self-funded, and well, we already are. So then you stick around hoping for the other tidbits to come out, so self-funded is the talk of the town across the country. when it comes to benefits.
And if I can jump on that, the reason why is because if we were fully insured, so the opposite of self-funded, we wouldn't have our reserves.
Right.
We would have
Oh,
just paid
yes, that's right.
all to the insurance company and they would have that money pocketed. And so any good years would have gone back to the health
Yes,
insurance
yes.
company.
You
So
would
the
have been
benefit of
that.
us, we're seeing the benefit now is like,
Right.
you have to ride the roller coaster, but we had the good years, but now we get to use it. We can delay our increase, but we have to plan for it because as we know, it's $1 million more, but.
It's like retirement.
Exactly.
You ride it out, right? You're playing the long game. So in self-funded, you're playing the long game, hoping that your 6 years that were really great, you have a few down years and then you're hoping to ride that turn, back up to your good years again.
And I do wanna say too, on a good note, is that we've implemented a number of strategies on our medical side. So we implemented NICE Healthcare, which is that, I don't know what, it's not a clinic,
In-home and virtual care.
in-home and virtual care for health insurance. So we work with USI and that's a opportunity that we get to use through USI. And many districts have, or some districts have, I should say, some districts have an on-site clinic or they call it a near-site clinic if it's nearby. This is kind of our version of that and we as a district pay a per member per month amount for our folks that are on this plan. So anybody who's on our health insurance plan has access to NICE. And I'll be a testimonial, like I love it. I've had them come to my office. I don't have to take sick time. A teacher could use it in a prep hour or before or after school. They can come to our homes. And any cost that happens through that does not go under our health insurance plan. So
It's all covered in the subscription.
we pay, so we pay this per member, we pay this flat amount, which is just over 100,000. I wanna say it's roughly 130,000 annually that we pay for NICE. So any cost that's happening through there is avoided on our health insurance plan, which helps in our experience and our.
Yeah, I use it as well, and there's virtually, if not no out of pocket.
That's
So-
that covers your co-pays and everything, you don't pay any of that.
It's free to,
It's completely
it's
free to the
Right.
employee.
So you're
Okay,
not, you're not doing any co-pays, you're not doing any,
Yep.
It doesn't hit your deductible though, so I mean,
Right, right.
it does not hit your deductible, but it's also zero cost to
But
you.
you can see them for a cold and they can get you a
Yes.
prescription for,
Yes.
amoxicillin or something
And then you
like that.
take your
Easily.
virtual card to the pharmacy and you have to go to the CVS, not the Walgreens, but you take your virtual card and I just did this and then they said it's gonna be, $20 and I said, here's my virtual card. They had to, okay, give me a minute and they had to do the thing and then $0.
Nice.
So, and so that's great benefit for our staff who are on our health insurance plan, but also the benefit on the back end is that none of those costs are going through our health insurance plan. So
There's
it's
about 600
possible.
prescriptions available, obviously the Stellaras and the whatever
Sure.
that are
They're
there.
not on there.
Those are for your
List.
most common, medications that are out there, but even for people who are diabetic or have high blood pressure or thyroid or any of those things, there are a considerable amount of maintenance meds on there that can be zero cost to both us and the employee, if they choose to use it.
Mhm. So the decrease in our medical spend on our plan, so the pharmacy side's increasing, but the medical side is actually decreasing, which shows that the strategies are starting to work. We also have tiered our network, so that's, both of these things are appearing to decrease our medical spend on our plan, which is a good thing, because if that was going up, then we'd really be
I
in
think it was about 14%.
a world of hurt, so.
14% decrease on the medical side. Which is actually great because
Mhm.
we just implemented those in 1/1/24.
You're gonna
So,
Year ago.
a year ago, so I mean, it's great to see that it's already had that effect.
And we've talked about doing more of a campaign too with schools on NICE and making sure that everybody has that information to keep that going in the right direction. Okay, I do wanna transition to special ed funding as another key piece. Anything else on the health insurance before we go? So we'll dig a lot farther into these, into our strategies.
And because we are 1/1 on benefits, any changes that we would be bringing forward to make to our health insurance coverage would be effective 1/1. And then obviously for our open enrollment, a window that starts in November, so we start advertising in October, so there's a big lead up to it. But it's not happening tomorrow.
Right.
So that's why it's part of a bigger strategy.
And every single meeting we go to, as Leah talked about, everybody's talking about the same thing. How do we combat these rising healthcare costs. So we are not alone in this. And I think honestly, I think we're a little bit delayed, to the party because we've had so many good years in a row. So, and the good news again is that we're self-funded. We have those savings in our account, not the health insurance company's account. So we get to utilize those and delay that increase. So that's the good news on that. Okay, state special education funding. So any questions, feel free to chime in at any time. This should provide a little bit more context as to that 33%. So that's what we are expecting, and as Shelley mentioned, again, that might not even be what actually happens because of the actual funding model of special ed is some certain, not some sufficient, which just means that the dollar amount that the state is putting towards that bucket has not been high enough to actually achieve the 33%. So in our current budget, we assume we have a 31.5% reimbursement rate. Again, we don't know the actual rate until the end of the year. So we're planning at 31.5%. Hopefully, hopefully it's higher. That would be good news for us in terms of getting additional dollars. At 31.5, we would receive approximately $2.4 million in state categorical aid. If the state reimbursed us, if the reimbursement rate had remained at 35%, which is what was originally promised in the state biennial budget, we would have seen an additional $270,000 in revenue. So they sound like small percentages, but they're based on a large number. 7.7 million, I believe, is the total that the 25 or the 35% is based on. So a couple percentage points, it has a big impact. And the graph, so that we have a couple graphs that we'll go through. This first one shows the special ed reimbursement rate over time, and you can see it's hovered around somewhere between 25 and 35%. But what I'll say on this is that when the state enacted revenue limits in 1993, the philosophy was that we, the state, will fund special ed at 2/3 funding. That's 66%, so we are well below that. As we just talked about, a single percentage increase is a couple $100,000. So 60% in our budget or 66% it's game-changing money. The blue words on the bottom left of the screen here are impactful. Low state reimbursement acts like a cut to general resources for all students. And that is because, as Wendy mentioned, I like how she said it, I'll have to look back at exactly the words that she stated. But basically the difference between what the revenue from special ed reimbursement and federal grants, which is our IDEA grants, which are flow through preschool, the difference between that is what the district has to fund. And that is represented in this bar graph. So the special ed revenue, I'll start with the expenses. The maroon bar on the right each year is the Fund 27 expenses. So those are all the dollars that we have to spend based on IEP needs for our students with special needs. And the gray is the revenue from the state and federal. So this is what Wendy was saying, put into a visual. The difference between those two graphs is what we have to fund each year as a transfer from our Fund 10, our general operating fund, to Fund 27. So again, you can see we have a significant difference each year. Said another way is a pie graph of the funding sources of special ed. So again, same concept, but the maroon you're seeing on here is the Fund 10 transfer, which shows almost 60% of special ed is funded by regular ed, or Fund 10. So that is just to state that special ed funding is very impactful and is right now not funding, it's not even funding, hardly a third of actual special ed expenses. So when we hear about the state biennial budget, this is one of the key pieces this year that we'll be keeping an eye on all years, but it's gotten a lot more attention, I think, because special ed expenses keep going up and up and up, just as they are for a regular operating fund as well, general operating fund as well, but more so for special ed. And as they increase and state funding either stays the same or goes down, we are left to cover the rest of that gap.
So let's say 59%, which is what we're putting from Fund 10, we're moving those dollars from Fund 10 to special ed. Let's say half of that money came to us surprisingly, we could cut that bar graph in half, then that Fund 10 money is available for regular expenses.
And that transfer that you're talking about is over $5 million for us.
5.7.
5.7.
Wow.
That's the difference between the maroon and the gray. It's 5.7.
Do we anticipate? I'm assuming the gap's gonna continue to grow, like, is that a fair assumption, that the
Mhm.
number of students requiring services is going to continue to increase?
We
and
don't
that it's
see
not
it
level?
slowing, you know, or the opposite.
Well, retreating, you're looking
Right.
at
It's
either
not
the main
plateauing.
thing.
Yeah, it's only increasing,
Yeah, okay.
sorry.
And we are required, you know, to provide services, so if a
Yeah.
student qualifies for services, then we are required to provide them, so we're not, you know, this isn't, it's not like school districts try to over-identify or under-identify, we
Right,
just
right.
do what's required based on, you know, IEPs, and this is on the funding side, this is what's happening. So this is a key piece that we'll be watching the state biennial budget for, to see, you know, what comes to fruition.
Historically, we've written a letter at all to help influence, did we do that this year, and do we bring up this issue with our advocates in the legislature?
Yeah, I met with one of our legislative representatives, and this was the main point of discussion.
That's good.
Special ed reimbursement. And actually, it was very similar to the back and forth that just occurred right here, trying to talk about some certain, and, you know, they might have said 33, but it's not really 33. So, you know, and us losing money that way. So, yeah, that was the basis of the conversation. I mean, if everything else stayed the same and they just did an adjustment inside of the special education, you know, there's always gonna be the political mechanizations that there are at the state level with who gets what and at what rate. But at the end of the day, these numbers are pretty stark, this is us.
Yep.
These last two pages are a very good reflection of, you know, what the challenge looks like locally. And then, you know, attach that to 1.6 million of additional RX spend that was unaccounted for. We couldn't budget for that.
So we will be working and have been on the back end, you know, in our offices and collaborating as a team and administration, working with principals on the ways in which we balance our budget. We do know that our retirement date is February 28th, that to give notice, so we will have more information on where those openings will be. We also have been working on enrollment projections and sectioning at all of our levels to understand where staff reductions could happen in terms of aligning with enrollment. So we see that, I know that we'll have some movement there that will allow us to find cost savings in that regard. We have a number of other ways that we can look at using one-time dollars, so we talked about our health insurance reserves, we also, you know, as Wendy mentioned earlier, our Fund 73, our OPEB account, we can look at funding some of those TSA benefits that currently are in Fund 10 out of Fund 73, so we're working on plan language that would allow us to do that. We have to change our Fund 73 trust language. That is one-time funding again, so we have those options we are looking at, as we've talked about and will tonight with our strategic plan, sponsorships. Not a budget saving program, but definitely additional revenue that we don't have right now, so sponsoring fields or courts or whatever it is. So we will talk at future meetings with, we'll go through an actual document with reductions and leverage items to solve our budget, balance our budget for 25-26. I'm confident we'll get there for 25-26.
Thanks.
Great,
Mhm.
any other questions on this item? We do have about 15 minutes left before the regular board meeting, and I know we have 2 items left, so
These will be much
I will let you, budget your time on however you'd like to on these two, so moving on.
Very funny.
Moving on to item C, open enrollment certificate.
I need to excuse myself to get prepped downstairs.
Okay, so both of these, we did the meteor ones first, so these are both much quicker, and the attachments that have all the information are also attached on board docs. So as we are aware, we did a survey for open enrollment out families, so families who live here and choose to open enroll out. There were 81 families that were emailed, so we have a number of families who have multiple children, so we have a little over 118 families who open enroll, or students who open enroll out. We received a 33% response rate, so 28 out of the 81 families responded. And the information is summarized here. So some highlights that we heard from families, which I do feel like many of these items have already been addressed. And I do also want to point out that the survey was done in January. People haven't been attending school this year in Menominee Falls. So these comments sometimes are, dated, or referring to different administration that might have been here at that time. So some key concerns that we heard were inadequate support for students with IEPs or unmet needs in special education. We heard about behavior problems or disruptive students. We heard about offering full-day 4K programs, virtual learning options, and specialized electives such as gifted and talented programming or language immersion. So those are some of the key pieces that we heard in terms of why families chose to open enroll out. That was really the question. Why do you choose to attend another school district? And then we also asked if there's anything that our school district could do to better compete with neighboring districts. So some of the key information there we heard was related to stronger focus on inclusivity and diversity, particularly in special education. Ensuring better academic standards and behavior management, ensuring all students feel accepted. I would say those are, and again, the words are all there, but those are the key highlights of the summary that we heard. And I will end again with saying on this note that I do feel that many of these needs have been addressed, and if they haven't already, some of the areas that we're working on expanding and already doing an analysis on are the expanding the 4K wraparound program, which should help our 4K it's kind of an all-day program at that point, so students can be here for the full day and parents don't have to worry about transportation midday. We are also exploring virtual learning options. Anything that we are able to implement would likely be a 26-27, so not next year but the following year implementation. And there's a number of different ways that we could go about that. So we're exploring what that could look like for us 2 years from now. And then also working on gifted and talented programming and what that looks like for our school district. So those were not surprises to us, and we've been exploring that this year. We'll have more information on those in the future. And then also attached, we don't have to go through them, but there's a couple graphs that came from the Google survey about where families, how many years they've lived in the district, the grade of the youngest child, and then we specifically asked about virtual schools. So the breakdown of families that said they might be interested, yes, no, maybe, are in there as well. So between the yes and the maybes, we had 8%, or not 8%, 8 families who said yes, they would be interested in that as an option in SEMF. 8 families. So those are open enrollment out survey. We do plan on doing that annually now. And then, go ahead.
I was just gonna
Okay.
say, on to the next item.
On to the next one.
I'll let you take it from here.
Okay, so finally, an annual item that we do is gifts to the district, which comes from our Fund 21. So it's kind of nice that Wendy did all the funds that she referenced we're talking about tonight. Fund 21 is student activities essentially. So we have a lot of student groups that happen through the Fund 21. All of our student groups happen through Fund 21. So this looks very comparable to our prior 2 years when we've reported this. We have, let's see. We've seen a 7% decrease from last year in terms of the overall revenue, but so this year we have $836 roughly $1,000 in overall revenue in our Fund 21. So I want to say this year, I'm referring to 23-24. Last year for 22-23 was $894, which was a really high year. Nothing on here looks out of the ordinary. Everything is pretty status quo. So I'll just highlight a couple items. We have lots of items from PTO, Box Top, different donations. Valley View had a PTO donation for partial donations for replacement of that tube slide on the playground that cracked, giving tree donations. We have lots of t-shirt sales and group, student group fundraisers, mental health awareness fundraisers, lots of bake sales. Also, for our sports that have invites, this is where the invite fees happen, so when we get those fees, invite fees from other districts, this is where those are documented. Football, Menominee Falls Junior Phoenix donation for senior banners, lots of brat fries, couple car washes, Go Pink fundraiser for breast cancer, feeder camp donations, robotics donations. So very standard, and this is where all of those donations and fundraisers are recorded within our Fund 21, so nothing out of the ordinary here to report.
Thank you, alright. Anything else? Otherwise, I'll need a motion to adjourn.
Call motion.
Second.
Motion by Ms. Holdman, second by Dr. Robert, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, we are adjourned.